Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jean, the Digital Event Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. We are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges by creating use of technology. Today I'm very excited to welcome you to join How to Undertake Project Management Without a PhD in the Subject with Stephen Molly, the founder of Fundraising Force. So later on, Stephen will be introducing himself. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type into the questions box and I'll be here to assist you. If you have any questions during the webinar, please also type into the questions box and Stephen will get them answered by the end. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible to make it very interactive. Please note that your comments and questions will not be appear to the entire group. And the webinar is now being recorded. A link with the recording and the slides will be sent to you in 1 to 2 business days. And finally, I would like to remind you that there's a very short survey at the end. Please help us to complete that for an even better experience in the future. All right, now I would like to pass to Stephen for today's section. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you, and thank you very much for your time. I'm really happy to be with you. I'm just going to start out by, as Jean said, introducing myself. So my background, as you can tell from my accent, is as a fundraiser in the US, and I moved to Australia 13 years ago. To work for a technology company, and then thereafter I started a company called Fundraising Force. And just to give you a little bit of information about Fundraising Force, we offer 2 streams of services. The first is fundraising strategy, both the development of the strategy and also the implementation of it. We also offer services in terms of technology, and those services are everything from searches for technology for not-for-profit organizations, universities, and schools. And we also help with technology implementations in terms of everything from project management to conducting technology reviews and training, as well as other advisory and implementation services on various technology platforms. It's important for me to tell you that we are product agnostic. So we do not care what technology platform a not-for-profit organization chooses. We really only care that you choose the best platform for your organization, and we're happy to work on any and all of them in the market. I've put together a bit of an agenda for us this morning, and that agenda includes defining what project management is, speaking to you about goals of project management. I'm going to highlight some skills that you ought to look for in a project manager, whether that's yourself or somebody in your organization, or perhaps a project manager that you bring in from outside of your organization. I'll talk to you about the various stages of project management. And then I'll talk to you about what sort of resources you should expect a project manager to utilize. Finally, I'm going to touch on where to find a project manager, whether that is a search within your organization or a search outside of your organization. And then I'll wrap up with some key takeaways and lessons. And of course, we'll get to all of your questions. And as Jean said, I invite you to put those in the question window here in the GoToMeeting, and we'll entertain all of those questions at the end of the webinar. These slides will be available as part of the recording, and my contact details are at the end on the last slide. I invite you to reach out to me via SMS, and of course, mobile phone. My number is on there, so you can ring me, and you can also send me an email. I want to thank all of you for your time today. I know that your time is very valuable, and I know there's probably a number of things that you could be doing during this hour. So I just want to say a special thank you to you. And I, of course, want to thank Connecting Up for inviting me to present this webinar as a follow-up to my last webinar, which is Finding the Perfect CRM. This one is called Managing the Perfect Project. You and I know that there is no perfect CRM out there, and there's no perfect project manager, but I hope today that you'll walk away with some improved information, some gained information, and some insights that perhaps you didn't have at the beginning of the webinar. We're going to start out with a poll question, and that poll question is, how many of you are seasoned project managers versus first-time project managers? And so, Jean, I'm going to turn it to you to open up that poll question. We'd like everybody to please take it now.
For sure. Thank you, Stephen. All right, now, so the poll is up. Please, every one of you could have vote for the answer, and then we'll share in a minute. All right, now we are having 86% voted, so let's wait for a couple of seconds.
Thank you.
Okay, so looks like we have 100% voted. Let me share the results now. All right, so we have 35% seasoned project manager, and then 65% first-time project manager.
Fantastic. Well, that's first of all, let me compliment all of you for taking the poll. Thank you. That's a great participation rate. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is it's interesting that we have 35% of you that have managed projects before. So you'll have to keep me honest and see if you agree with the advice that I give throughout the webinar today. Jean, I'm just going to check with you to make sure that you can see my PowerPoint slide again.
Yes, it's
Okay.
all good.
Good. It would have been awkward if I would have continued to talk and nobody could see my PowerPoint. So thank you. That's great. So thank you everybody again for taking that poll. So now let me just talk to you about some goals that I have for you today, or for all of us today. I'm going to hopefully offer you some steps to manage your next project, or that your project manager should follow to manage that great project. Again, I'm going to offer you some resources, and you'll see those resources not only mentioned, but also flash on the screen. So we've got several samples that I think I promised you in the promotion, and hopefully will deliver accordingly. And then I'm going to also talk to you about some lessons that I've learned in the projects that I've managed. Hopefully you'll avoid some of those pitfalls, but also learn from some of the successes as well. So I mentioned that I'm going to define project management, and it really is a process that guides a team's work to accomplish all of a project's goals. So I think that probably makes sense to you. Again, it's a process that guides your team's work, and that could be a collection of teams as part of a technology project to accomplish that project's goals. And the goal of project management is to produce a completed project that meets objectives. Those objectives might be that the project comes in on time and on budget, and that you've got a high rate of adoption. When it comes to a technology project, we want user adoption to be plentiful. So it might be that your project comes in on time, on budget, and that you've got a very high rate of adoption. Now let's turn our attention to the skills of a project manager. And this is quite a long list, but I think it's a really important list. And so a project manager should be an effective communicator. Your project manager needs to be somebody who can communicate day in and day out with all types of people throughout your organization. He or she must communicate through a variety of channels. Your project manager should be a key negotiator and a key diplomat. So there are times that a project manager will have to negotiate for time from various resources throughout the organization. That project manager will also have to be a diplomat. He or she needs to sometimes walk a fine line and sometimes, as I say, be a diplomat throughout the organization. The project manager needs to be able to schedule resources, schedule your suppliers, and needs to manage time, not only his or her time, but they also have to manage the time of your resources. They have to use that time wisely. Not everybody in your organization will dedicate 100% of their time to a project, no matter what that project is. And so he or she needs to effectively use the time of everybody across the organization. Your project manager needs to be a leader, not a follower, but a leader throughout the organization. The project manager needs to offer a level of technical expertise. He or she does not have to know the technical solution inside and out. I, for one, don't know every bit of technology that's available in the Asia Pacific marketplace. I don't think anybody does. But I need to have a basic level of understanding of the technology and be able to apply that basic understanding across the organization. The project manager needs to be able to manage risks. And I'll show you a few tools that he or she can use to manage risks of any technology project, or quite frankly, any project across the organization. The project manager needs to be a critical thinker and needs to be solutions oriented. And what I mean by that is he or she needs to be able to understand the business to a certain level and needs to engage subject matter experts and process owners to a certain stage, and then needs to be able to apply solutions to those processes, to those different areas across the organization. They don't have to be an expert in all of those processes. They're going to bring those experts to the table, but they need to roll their sleeves up and be able to apply various solutions to the processes that come to the table. They need to be well organized. You wouldn't want somebody who isn't a good organizer and good at rallying the troops to be organized day in and day out. The project manager also has to be in charge of the budget. So they've got to keep tabs of the budget at the start and the expenses against that budget throughout the course of the project. If there are, if the budget's in trouble, they need to be able to raise that and raise it effectively with the steering committee. The project manager needs to be an orchestra leader. I mentioned earlier that they need to have a certain understanding within the organization. And I say that they need to be an orchestra leader. They don't need to play every instrument in the orchestra, but they need to have an understanding of those instruments, and they need to be able to conduct the orchestra. The project manager needs to be the chief cheerleader for the project. So you want to have somebody who has a strong enough personality to be able to get along with all different types of personalities in your organization and be able to effectively cheer the teams on to keep the project going. And the last item that I've got up here is they at times need to be a traffic cop. They need to stop traffic where it needs to be stopped and encourage the traffic coming from the other direction to proceed. That's a long list of skills. Not everybody will have each of those skills at 100%, but you want to have a good mix of those skills in your project manager. Let's now look at the stages of project management. The first stage is conception and initiation. The second stage is definition and planning. The third is launching of the project or execution of the project. The fourth is performance and control. And the last is project closure. I'm going to go through these now in detail, and I'll offer you some sample resources that will be used, sample deliverables that will be used throughout each and every stage. And those are going to flash up on your screen, but I'll walk you through them as best as I'm able as time allows. And of course, I mentioned earlier that my contact details are on the last slide, and I invite you to reach out to me to ask questions at the end of the webinar. So the first stage, again, is conception and initiation. And this is really where you're going to inherit the project as the project manager, and you're going to evaluate it. What is the makeup of the project that you've been handed, that you've inherited as the project manager? How are you going to define this project from beginning to end? And what are the outcomes that the steering committee, that the project sponsor hopes to achieve by your deliverance of this project? Some of the key outputs in this particular stage of project management, the first is a project charter. That project charter looks something like this. This is the table of contents of one of them. You'll see that this particular project charter has an overview of the project, and there's a lot of things in that. You'll see who's the project sponsor, who's the project manager, what are the project team members, when does it start, when does it end, what's the background of the project, how is the project fully described, what are the objectives, the success criteria, what does the timeline look like, what is the cost, who are the resources involved in the project, and then it gets into milestone and deliverables, a little bit about risk mitigation, who are the stakeholders involved, what is the communications plan, and what is the decision tree? How are we going to escalate decisions that can't be made at a certain level? Project infrastructure, I think this is probably one of the most important documents, and this is an example here. You'll see that this particular project infrastructure has an org chart. We all, exist in our organization within org charts, and our projects need an org chart as well. And then you'll see within that org chart each and every level and the parties who make up each and every level described and identified. And the last is a project plan, and that project plan won't be as detailed as the project charter and perhaps the project infrastructure, but the project plan is quite important. The next stage is defining and some more planning, and this is really where the scope of work will be developed. This is where a timeline is established. Here's a sample screenshot of what a structure of a timeline looks like. And so you'll see here that the various stages exist. You'll see the tasks within those stages, the start and end date, the duration is calculated. You'll see the parties who are involved. And then as the project plan, the project timeline ticks along, you'll see that the tasks are marked off and the completion rate is calculated. This particular project schedule also has dependencies. And so this tool that I'm using here, which is called Smartsheet, a very sophisticated Excel sort of piece of software, you'll see that the predecessors here, the dependencies are documented, and when something is calculated, then the dependency likewise gets calculated. Again, this is just an example, but you can at least get a flavor for how that Smartsheet can be in existence for this project schedule. Project resourcing, again, really important in this definition and planning stage. Your project toolbox. So this is where you're going to identify what tools you're going to use. I just mentioned Smartsheet. There are a number of tools that I'm going to mention throughout the webinar. There are any number of tools available out there. I'm sure that people who have project managed before will put in the question screen other resources that they've used as part of their toolbox as well. Again, this is where we're going to develop that communications or that change plan. That's a really important document. We want to make sure that we've got a high, in terms of a technology project, a high rate of user adoption. And therefore, all of the tasks that are followed in this communications or change plan actually lead us toward that end goal. Here's a table of contents of one particular communications or change plan. And so here you'll see there's an introduction, leadership is mentioned, the objectives of the project, the different objectives and principles, the different elements and purposes, the rationale for the change, the key stakeholders, an assessment of readiness of change, and the key change messages that we're going to use to adopt throughout the course of the project. Your change plan may look very different. Yours might be more simple for your organization. It all depends upon the size and the scope of the project, but these are just example sections of what I typically have in my change or comms plan. Then there's also the risk register, and that's developed during this stage. And here is an example of a risk register. This is the main tab of the risk register where some nice, I guess, dashboard reports or calculated reports are created. And behind that is, of course, some detail. And so here you'll see the risks and the consequence, the likelihood of it happening, the rating of the risk, some controls that we're going to put in place to mitigate that risk, and some other factors. All of those actually allow for this dashboard to be created to give a nice visual for your steering committee. We now move on to launch or execution. And this is really where you're going to kick off the project. So those first couple of stages were all about planning and getting ready to execute the project, but this is where we're going to kick off the project. I recommend that you do some sort of event to kick off the project, whether that's an event at a staff meeting, whether it's a social event in the evening, after work, whatever it is, but build some excitement for your project. Remember, you're trying to engage people in the project, so there's no better way to do that than at the very start to kick off a project. This is also where we're going to build some quality assurance in. And so as the project manager, you need to keep your eye on the prize, but you've also got to keep your eye on each and every detail. At any given time, Fundraising Force probably has 5 or 6 projects going at varying stages. So not all at the beginning and certainly not all at the end. So they're all at a variety of stages. And therefore, we've got to make sure that we're keeping our eye on that QA throughout the course, and we're keeping our eye on each and every detail as best as we're able to do. This is also where you're going to forecast and you're going to reforecast. So keeping your eyes on the project schedule, mitigating the risk, talking to the steering committee about originally we thought we were going to do this task on this date, but we're tracking ahead of schedule or we're tracking behind schedule and therefore we're reforecasting. This is also where you're going to get your project team to deliver. And so earlier I showed you a bit of an org chart and some job descriptions for various team members. Your project team is a really important part of the delivery. They are the team that focuses in on with the project manager on delivering that project. So it's important to have 3 or 4 people, depending upon the size of your project, on that project team. They all won't be doing the same task at the same time, and they all won't focus in on the same areas. You'll have somebody focusing in on a technology project on the data, somebody else focusing in on other parts of the project, just to make sure that you've got a lead on the project team focused on those key deliverables. Your project team will meet at least fortnightly, if not weekly, and will ensure that we're delivering the project to schedule. Some of the key outputs as part of this stage in the project, the execution, include KPIs and making sure that you're achieving those key performance indicators, and weekly project status reports. Those weekly project status reports are divided into, this is what we accomplished last week, this is what we hope to accomplish this week. And here's an example of a project status report that I delivered back in February for one of our projects. You'll notice at the top that we've got everything in green, which is great. That's what you want. Not everything will be in green with every project. You might find that they're amber or red if something's in danger. And this is a nice visual at the top of the project status report for you to give the project sponsor, or perhaps the project steering committee, and who will be able to read the detail if they want to, but they can see in a snapshot at the very top how the project's tracking. Now we move on to performance and control. So this is where we keep our eye on all of the objectives of the project, as well as all of those key deliverables. Those objectives and deliverables have been outlined at the very beginning in the project charter and have been agreed on by all parties. So you want to make sure that you keep your eye on those objectives and that you ensure that all of the deliverables are delivered on time. Now, no project is perfect. Every project has delays, and it's how you manage those delays that really matters as a project manager. We want to look at all of the effort, and we want to track costs. And that's how we control the project. So again, not everything goes to plan. Some things track behind, some things cost more. New things come up during a project, and you'll have to deal with those, whether those become changes to a project or ultimately get put off into a future phase. Performance is managed here, so not every team member will perform at 110%, and things happen. COVID has happened. I don't have to tell anybody on this webinar the impact that that's had on many projects, right? Whether those are day-to-day sort of things or long-term projects, COVID has impacted how we work, and it's certainly impacted attendance, contributions on projects. And so we want to manage that day in and day out and deal with it as it happens. I mentioned the steering committee earlier. I think I've mentioned it on a couple of occasions, and the steering committee really oversees the entire project. They're sitting at the top of that org chart. The steering committee is sometimes made up of just a few people, and that steering committee is your escalation point. So if you cannot resolve something as a project team, the steering committee is the next point. They're the oversight committee that will ultimately help you steer the project, guide the project. They are the treasury for the project, if you will, and so if anything requires a change request, they'll have to sign off on that, etc. You do not want your steering committee to manage the project, and you do not want your steering committee in the weeds. If they are in the weeds or they're managing the project, your project manager isn't doing his or her job, and the project team is not performing appropriately. Some key outputs as part of this stage here, performance and control, include project team meetings. So I mentioned that those would be fortnightly at a minimum, perhaps weekly, especially during certain parts of the project. In a technology project, for example, the project team might meet weekly during user acceptance testing and as you move toward go live. And steering committee meetings, those should probably be no more than monthly. Maybe during certain times of the project they become fortnightly, but I would encourage you to keep those monthly. And now we move on to project closure. And so during project closure, you really want to do a post-project meeting where all parties analyze the project. The positives are discussed, and of course the negatives. What did we learn from the project? What would we have done differently if we could redo the project? And those lessons learned are documented in what's called a project debrief document. That is a deliverable that's left behind. It's usually delivered by your project manager, sometimes with supplier involvement. And everybody gets a copy of that, and it's a record of the success and also sometimes those lessons learned in a project. You want to make sure that you do a formal handover at the project closure stage. There's a lot to learn from the project at this stage, and you also want to not repeat mistakes that were made throughout the course of the project. So did you have proper resourcing? Did team members dedicate enough time? Was the project endorsed high enough in the organization? Was it made a priority by your leadership? Or was it considered to be a thorn in everybody's side? Were there enough, excuse me, resources given to the project? Was there enough budget allocated to the project? Was there proper resources? Was there proper tools given to the project? All of that sort of stuff will be documented in this formal handover. A project punch list is important. Not every project will finish with all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So I encourage you to create a punch list just the way you'd have a punch list if you were to build a new home or renovate one. There'll be things that need to be done post closure of the project, and certainly during a warranty period with suppliers. So you want to have that punch list well documented and make sure that you hang the door correctly and you fill the hole in the wall and that sort of thing the way we would with a new home. You want to make sure that reporting is done, not only about the project debrief and that formal handover, but any other reporting that needs to be put in place for leadership into the future. During this stage, we want to report out to all stakeholders how we did. You certainly want to report to the board about how we did. I encourage you to celebrate the outcomes of the project. In many of the projects that we run, we actually throw the celebration for our clients. We've done several that were after hours social events. It's a nice time to get together, celebrate the success, recognize the things that could have gone better, but also take time to celebrate the outcome of the project. I think sometimes we focus too much on the negative and not on the positive outcome. So I encourage you to have a bit of celebration. And thereafter, you're going to move into business as usual. So you're going to slide into day-to-day business, and it'll be like this project never happened. Soon it will be forgotten. But you want to make sure that business as usual goes really smoothly. And so all of the things that I've talked about on today's webinar up until this point will ensure BAU goes smoothly. All right, so let me talk now about some resources, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I tried to keep it simple because not every organization has an endless budget to deploy additional software and tools throughout the course of a project. So I'm going to mention some on this slide, but I'm also going to mention a few others that you might consider. And again, I encourage those of you who have managed projects to put some ideas in the question window, and we'll look at those near the end of the webinar today. So budget tools, there are many out there, but quite frankly, Microsoft Excel does that nicely for you. And I'm just going to show you here. So here's a sample project budget. Don't worry about the figures. It's related to a certain organization, might not apply to you. But the interesting thing is you can tell I did this in Excel. That document can be shared as a Google Sheet or shared on Teams and accessible to everybody in the organization, or at least those people that are focused on working on the project. It's an easy way to track the budget. You'll of course have other detail worksheets affiliated with this particular budget sheet, but nonetheless, I think it's an easy way. Lots of people know Excel in an organization, and therefore it's a convenient way to track a budget. Here's a detail page that's affiliated with that particular budget that I showed you the summary page of, but you'll see here that I'm able to document the business plan budget, but then I'm also able to allocate month by month when that spend is going to be made. And then I can track the actual here, and you can see when the spend was actually made. All of that would tally up here and on other screens as well. So again, you can see the convenience here, and I think many of us know Excel well, at least well enough to use this as a convenient tool. All right, scheduling. So earlier I mentioned Smartsheet, and that's certainly available to us. Many people like to use Microsoft Project. I happen to not like to use Microsoft Project, but it's a tool that is widely used in the market, and certainly a sophisticated tool that can be used for scheduling. And there are also collaboration tools out there in the market, such as Monday.com and others that you might want to consider. In terms of a risk register, again, I like to use Microsoft Excel because people know it throughout the organization and it's easy to use. And here's an example of a risk register. This happens to be the dashboard reports that are calculated by the detail behind it. And there's a detail screen. I sort of walked you through the makeup of that detail screen earlier, but nonetheless, you can see some of the risks that this particular organization is tracking. Collaboration tools. So I mentioned earlier, Monday.com, but there are others that are used by many of my projects and certainly by others. Those in bold I like to use, and those are Trello and ShareFile. But Asana, Microsoft Teams, there are lots of tools in the market, many more than I've got here on the slide that are utilized. The reason I like Trello so well is it allows you to set up tasks as just individual cards. You can assign parties to them. You can also do that in Teams. Teams has that capacity, and there are also other tools in the market. Whatever you use, I think you want to make sure that it's easy. You set it up structurally so it's really easy to follow. You can then use that throughout the course of the project. We oftentimes use Trello for task management, but we also use it for user acceptance testing and other phases of the project in a really clear, concise, and easy to use way. All right, let me talk to you about where to find a PM, whether that's in your organization or external to your organization. So if you're going to look within your organization, I think you want to find a party that can dedicate enough time to the project and give that person the backing to actually have that space to manage the project. Lots of people feel like this can be an easy add-on for anybody to take on who's organized and who has got a good personality and is easy to work with. And that might be true to a certain extent, but you have to make sure that you clear the space for that party to actually do the work and not let their BAU or their day-to-day work get in the way. And that tends to be a real problem for an organization because sometimes people are really good at carving out and separating the two, the project management from their day-to-day or business as usual activity, Oftentimes people are not, and they can't let go of that BAU, or the organization won't allow them to let go of certain tasks. So if you can't clear that space, the next best thing is to find somebody on the outside. And I've given you a few ideas here on how to find somebody in the market. So Fundraising Force isn't the only game in town. We do a lot of project management, but there are other consultants in the market that actually manage projects. And you can find us by word of mouth. So that happens to be about 75 or 80% of the Fundraising Force business is word of mouth. And that means that we've done a good enough job or a fantastic enough job with our clients that others refer business our way. They talk about us to their colleagues, and that's fantastic. And you might find out about consultants in the market through this word of mouth. The other way to do it is just to Google it. So if you're looking for a project manager for your technology project, just put in nonprofit, technology project manager, and you'll find those of us in the market that do offer this kind of service. I think your technology partner ought to be leaned on as well. So whether you're implementing, a Blackbaud product, Salesforce, Microsoft, or Vega, or one of the other fantastic CRMs that's out there in the market, you ought to lean on that technology partner to ask them who they know. The important thing to remember is that your technology partner will have a project manager, but that project manager who's employed by your technology partner will not manage your project. They'll only manage their team and their deliverables. So you must have a project manager who will work very closely with your technology project manager. At the end of the day, though, your technology project manager will have worked with many other project managers out there in the market, and they can refer you to those parties as well. All right, I'm going to sum up what I think are some key takeaways, whether I said these verbatim or they are summation of some of the topics that I covered. I think it's important to sum these up. And so those are, not everyone can manage a project. So not everyone in your organization is capable of managing a project. It is really important that you give them the space to manage the project, and that you also engage the right party within your organization to manage the project. You want to make sure that they've got many of those attributes that I mentioned on one of those early slides. Project manager does require the right skill set. It's not just the person in your office that's great at planning the office Christmas party. It is a person in your office that does have those skills, those core skills in terms of financial oversight, time management, cheerleader skills, diplomatic skills, those things that are really important. Project management is not a casual 2-hour-a-week gig. So when Fundraising Force takes on a project for a client, we make sure that we've got enough time to dedicate to that project, and we promise a certain number of hours each and every month to our clients. You'd want to make sure that your project manager can promise a certain number of hours each and every week, each and every month to see the project through. You want to make sure that your project manager can also dedicate the full term to the project. Nothing could be worse for your project or for your organization than to have turnover at that project management level. Time spent on those early stages defining and planning the project will save time downstream. So I can't stress that enough. Those early stages before you launch the project are really important to invest in. And remember, if you don't have a party in your organization who has the skills nor the time to dedicate to the project, remember that there are professionals in the market who do this full-time professionally, and you can lean on them, providing you can afford, project management. All right, I'm now going to open it up to questions. And as we do that, I'm going to put my contact details up on the screen. And remember, these are part of the slides and of course the recording that you're going to receive after today's call. So I'm just going to open it up to questions now. And Jean, maybe you can help guide me through the.
Of course. Thank you very much, Stephen, for such a very informative sections. So I believe there's lots to take away. And now is the Q&A sections. Please feel free to type in your questions into the questions box and Stephen can get them answered straight away. All right. So we got a questions here. Can you advise what's the typical project management charge usually?
Thank you. I thought I might get the good old cost question. I know that that's an important question, especially for not-for-profit and universities and schools, as it should be. So I'll tell you how we bill, and I don't know if that's how a majority of consultants in the market would bill, but we offer a set number of hours, and we typically do it on a retainer arrangement. Our rate tends to be low compared to perhaps other professionals in the market, simply because we only serve not-for-profit organizations. I'm not going to share what that rate would be because it tends to be negotiated project by project, but I think that it's important that you, as you get 3 bids, that you create a competitive atmosphere and that you also look at consultants who only serve the not-for-profit market, because those that serve a blend of not-for-profit and for-profit tend to have the higher hourly rate, and that's just the way that they bill. Some projects could be done on an hourly rate. So I mentioned the retainer, which is tends to be a lower rate and a smarter way because you receive a set number of hours each and every month. And that means that that consultant is dedicated to your project for that number of hours. Those hours can increase during key parts of the project, such as user acceptance testing and go live, but it's generally the same number of hours on average across the project. The final piece of this answer is, again, that a project could be billed on an hourly rate. Some organizations might favor that because not every single month is as busy as those peak periods during a project. And so therefore they may find that in those planning months and those slower time frames that an hourly rate on average is less expensive for them. I think in total, you can expect to pay several $1,000s per month for a project manager to dedicate their time. And likewise, if it's an internal resource, you can imagine that that would be the cost to your business in terms of that person's salary. I hope that that answers the question, Jean.
Yep, 100%. Thank you very much for that. And we got another question from Susan. So she's asking, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation, Stephen. And so there's lots of takeaways. So if I would like to identify 1 or 2 most important things in project management, what do you recommend?
Yeah. Well, in answer to your question, first of all, thank you for your question and thank you for attending as well. In terms of 2 or 1, 2, 3 most important things, I think don't skimp on project management. It's not a casual thing. I think you'll find those that do skimp or try to, slide by with a very part-time resource or somebody who's a great organizer and can just take this on top of their full-time job, tend to find that that doesn't work out. So I guess don't skimp and clear space for that internal person, or hire somebody from the outside who can dedicate the time to do the project. And then I would also say spend time at the beginning planning, and doing more planning. And like everything, when you plan, you tend to have a better outcome. I think when projects aren't well planned, they can't be well executed. So I would spend easily that first month getting that planning down. I'm doing that right now with a hospital in Melbourne, and we delayed the launch of the project so that we can get that planning right. And I think that that was the right decision. It was right from a resourcing perspective, but more importantly for that planning perspective. I think they're going to have a better experience as we execute the project, and certainly a better outcome at go live. So Susan, I hope that that answers your question.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Yes, it's totally very important to have strategic planning before the execution. So I believe that this can answer Susan's questions. All right, so next we have Patrick here. So there's a quote. If I have 5 hours to cut down the tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Yes. Thank you, Patrick. 100%.
I agree, Patrick. Thank you.
Yes. And we have Rachel saying, oh, I've got no questions, but thank you for your knowledge and generous sharing.
Thank you, Rachel.
Lovely. So it looks like it's very clear to us. And again, the presentation will be sent to you in 1 to 2 business days with the recording as well. If you would like to approach Stevens, that's the contact right here on our screen. But don't worry about copying that, because you'll be getting the context with the recording plus the presentation as well. All right. So before we wrap up, do you have anything you would like to add, Stephen?
I just want to say thank you to you for inviting me to present today, and I want to thank everybody for attending. I am in the US right now at present visiting family and friends, but I'll be back in Australia on the 11th of May. Don't hesitate to reach out to me in the interim if you need anything, and I'm always available, and I appreciate having the opportunity to share this information today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So once again, thank you very much, Stephen, for being our presenter. It's such an honor to have you today.
Thank you.
All right. So I believe most of us are seeing my screen now. So I would like to share our upcoming conference on May. So it is our annual conference that hosted by Connecting Up every year. So the conference date is on the 11th to 13th of May at the Melbourne Convention Centre. So as you can see our screen, so this conference is basically composed of master classes. The main conference, we invited the world-class speakers, especially tailored for not-for-profit organizations. So we have been hosting this for many years already. And now we believe this is one of the best conference that we never had before, because the speakers we have the highest numbers of speakers attendings. So don't miss the chance. I'm sure there's lots of takeaway from it. If you are interested to join us, I'll be sending the link with the discount code together in the email as well, so that you can register straight away. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Stephen, again today. And thank you very much for all of you. Okay. Let me double check. It looks like there's one question here. Please allow me to check it. 1 second. Okay. Oh, I believe, Stephen, you already answered the question. It's asking the price again. So if you want to elaborate more, or it's good enough.
No, I I think we did answer that earlier, and if anybody wishes to speak with me, I'm happy to talk with you individually.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for the offer. All
Thank you.
right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. See
Bye
ya.
now.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.